Saudi Arabia. Officially, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a country in West Asia and the Middle East. It covers the bulk of the Arabian Peninsula and has a land area of about 2,150,000 square kilometers, making it the fifth largest country in Asia and the largest in the Middle East. It is bordered by the Red Sea to the west, Jordan, Iraq, and Kuwait to the north, the Persian Gulf, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates to the east, Oman to the southeast, and Yemen to the south. The Gulf of Aqaba in the northwest separates Saudi Arabia from Egypt and Israel. Saudi Arabia is the only country with a coastline along both the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, and most of its terrain consists of arid desert, lowland, steppe, and mountains. The capital and largest city is Riyadh. Other major cities include Jeddah and the two holiest cities in Islam, Mecca and Medina. With a population of almost 32.2 million, Saudi Arabia is the fourth most populous country in the Arab world. Pre-Islamic Arabia, the territory that constitutes modern-day Saudi Arabia, was the site of several ancient cultures and civilizations. The prehistory of Saudi Arabia shows some of the earliest traces of human activity outside Africa. Islam, the world's second largest religion, emerged in what is now Saudi Arabia in the early 7th century. Islamic prophet Muhammad united the population of the Arabian Peninsula and created a single Islamic religious polity. Following his death in 632, his followers expanded Muslim rule beyond Arabia, conquering territories in North Africa, Central, South Asia, and Iberia within decades. Arab dynasties originating from modern-day Saudi Arabia founded the Rashidun, Umayyad, Abbasid, and Fatimid caliphates, as well as numerous other dynasties in Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was founded in 1932 by King Abdulaziz, also known as Ibn Saud, who united the regions of Hejaz, Najd, parts of eastern Arabia and South Arabia into a single state through a series of conquests, beginning in 1902 with the capture of Riyadh, the ancestral home of his family, the House of Saud. Saudi Arabia has since been an absolute monarchy governed by an authoritarian regime without public input. In its basic law, Saudi Arabia defines itself as a sovereign Arab Islamic state with Islam as its official religion and Arabic as its official language. The ultra-conservative Wahhabi religious movement within Sunni Islam was the prevailing political and cultural force in the country until the 2000s. The Saudi government has attracted criticism for various policies such as its intervention in the Yemeni civil war, alleged sponsorship of terrorism, and widespread human rights abuses. Saudi Arabia is considered both a regional and middle power. Since petroleum was discovered in the country in 1938, the kingdom has become the world's third largest oil producer and leading oil exporter, controlling the world's second largest oil reserves and the sixth largest gas reserves. Saudi Arabia is categorized as a World Bank high-income economy and is the only Arab country among the G20 major economies. The Saudi economy is the largest in the Middle East and the world's 19th largest by nominal GDP and 17th largest by PPP. Ranking very high in the Human Development Index, Saudi Arabia offers tuition-free university education, no personal income tax, and free universal health care. With its dependency on foreign labor, Saudi Arabia has the world's third largest immigrant population. Saudi Arabians are among the world's youngest people, with approximately half being under 25 years old. Saudi Arabia is an active and founding member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, United Nations, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Arab League, and OPEC, as well as a dialogue partner of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. History. There is evidence that human habitation in the Arabian Peninsula dates back to about 125,000 years ago. A 2011 study found that the first modern humans to spread east across Asia left Africa about 75,000 years ago across the Bab el-Mandeb connecting the Horn of Africa and Arabia. The Arabian Peninsula is regarded as central to the understanding of evolution and dispersals of man. Arabia underwent an extreme environmental fluctuation in the Quaternary that led to profound evolutionary and demographic changes. Arabia has a rich Lower Paleolithic record, and the quantity of old Awan-like sites in the region indicate a significant role that Arabia had played in the early hominin colonization of Eurasia. In the Neolithic period, prominent cultures such as al-Maghar, whose center lay in modern-day southwestern Najd, flourished. Al-Maghar could be considered a Neolithic revolution in human knowledge and handicraft skills. The culture is characterized as being one of the world's first to involve the widespread domestication of animals, particularly the horse, during the Neolithic period. Al-Maghar statues were made from local stone, and it seems that the statues were fixed in a central building that might have had a significant role in the social and religious life of the inhabitants. In November 2017, hunting scenes showing images of most likely domesticated dogs and wearing leashes were discovered in Shuwaimas, a hilly region of northwestern Saudi Arabia. These rock engravings date back more than 8,000 years, making them the earliest depictions of dogs in the world. At the end of the 4th millennium BC, Arabia entered the Bronze Age, metals were widely used, and the period was characterized by its 2 high burials, which were simultaneously followed by the existence of numerous temples that included many freestanding sculptures originally painted with red colors. In May 2021, archaeologists announced that a 350,000-year-old Acheulean site named An-Nazim in the Hale region could be the oldest human habitation site in northern Saudi Arabia. 354 artifacts, including hand axes and stone tools, provided information about tool-making traditions of the earliest living men inhabited Southwest Asia. Paleolithic artifacts are similar to material remains uncovered at the Acheulean sites in the Nafud Desert. Pre-Islamic. The earliest sedentary culture in Saudi Arabia dates back to the Ubaid period at Dosariya. Climatic change and the onset of aridity may have brought about the end of this phase of settlement, as little archaeological evidence exists from the succeeding millennium. The settlement of the region picks up again in the period of Dilmun in the early 3rd millennium. Known records from Uruk refer to a place called Dilmun, associated on several occasions with copper, and in later periods it was a source of imported woods in southern Mesopotamia. Scholars have suggested that Dilmun originally designated the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, notably linked with the major Dilmunite settlements of Umm-an-Nusi and Umm-ar-Ramad in the interior and Taraut on the coast. It is likely that Taraut Island was the main port and the capital of Dilmun. Mesopotamian inscribed clay tablets suggest that, in the early period of Dilmun, a form of hierarchical organized political structure existed. In 1966, an earthwork in Taraut exposed an ancient burial field that yielded a large statue dating to the Dilmunite period. The statue was locally made under the strong Mesopotamian influence on the artistic principle of Dilmun. By 2200 BC, the center of Dilmun shifted for unknown reasons from Taraut and the Saudi Arabian mainland to the island of Bahrain, and a highly developed settlement emerged there, where a laborious temple complex and thousands of burial mounds dating to this period were discovered. By the Late Bronze Age, a historically recorded people and land in the northwestern portion of Saudi Arabia are well documented in the Bible. Centered in Tabuk, it stretched from Wadi Araba in the north to the area of Al-Waj in the south. The capital of Midian was Koraya. It consists of a large, fortified citadel encompassing 35 hectares, and below it lies a walled settlement of 15 hectares. The city hosted as many as 12,000 inhabitants. The Bible recounts Israel's 2 wars with Midian, somewhere in the early 11th century BC. Politically, the Midianites were described as having a decentralized structure headed by 5 kings. The names appears to be toponyms of important Midianite settlements. It is common to view that Midian designated a confederation of tribes. The sedentary element settled in the Hijaz while its nomadic affiliates pastured and sometimes pillaged as far away as Palestine. The nomadic Midianites were one of the earliest exploiters of the domestication of camels that enabled them to navigate through the harsh terrains of the region. At the end of the 7th century BC, an emerging kingdom appeared in northwestern Arabia. It started as a sheikdom of Dedan, which developed into the kingdom of Liyan. During this period, Dedan transformed into a kingdom that encompassed a much wider domain. In the early 3rd century BC, with bustling economic activity between the south and north, Liyan acquired large influence suitable to its strategic position on the caravan road. The Liyanites ruled over a large domain from Yathrib in the south and parts of the Levant in the north. In antiquity, Gulf of Aqaba used to be called Gulf of Liyan, a testimony to the extensive influence that Liyan acquired. The Liyanites fell into the hands of the Nabateans around 65 BC upon their seizure of Hijra, then marching to Tama, and to their capital Dedan in 9 BC. The Nabateans ruled large portions of North Arabia until their domain was annexed by the Roman Empire, which renamed it Arabia Petrea, and remained under the rule of the Romans until 630. Middle Ages and rise of Islam. Shortly before the advent of Islam, apart from urban trading settlements such as Mecca and Medina, much of what was to become Saudi Arabia was populated by nomadic pastoral tribal societies. The Islamic prophet Muhammad was born in Mecca in about 570 CE. In the early 7th century, Muhammad united the various tribes of the peninsula and created a single Islamic religious polity. Following his death in 632, his followers expanded the territory under Muslim rule beyond Arabia, conquering territory in the Iberian Peninsula in the west to parts of Central and South Asia in the east in a matter of decades. Arabia became a more politically peripheral region of the Muslim world as the focus shifted to the newly conquered lands. Arabs originating from modern-day Saudi Arabia, the Hejaz in particular, founded the Rashidun, Umayyad, Abbasid, and the Fatimid caliphates. From the 10th century to the early 20th century, Mecca and Medina were under the control of a local Arab ruler known as the Sharif of Mecca, but at most times the Sharif owed allegiance to the ruler of one of the major Islamic empires based in Baghdad, Cairo, or Istanbul. Most of the remainder of what became Saudi Arabia reverted to traditional tribal rule. For much of the 10th century, the Ismaili Shiite Qarmashins were the most powerful force in the Persian Gulf. In 930, the Qarmashins pillaged Mecca, outraging the Muslim world, particularly with their theft of the Black Stone. In 1077 to 1078, an Arab sheikh named Abdullah bin Ali al-Uyuni defeated the Qarmashins in Bahrain and Al-Hassa with the help of the Seljuk Empire and founded the Uyunid dynasty. The Uyunid Emirate later underwent expansion with its territory stretching from Najd to the Syrian desert. They were overthrown by the Usfurids in 1253. Usfurid rule was weakened after Persian rulers of Hormuz captured Bahrain and Qatif in 1320. The vassals of Hormuz, the Shia Jarwanid dynasty, came to rule eastern Arabia in the 14th century. The Jabrids took control of the region after overthrowing the Jarwanids in the 15th century and clashed with Hormuz for more than 2 decades over the region for its economic revenues, until finally agreeing to pay tribute in 1507. Al-Muntafik tribe later took over the region and came under Ottoman suzerainty. The Bani Khalid tribe later revolted against them in the 17th century and took control. Their rule extended from Iraq to Oman at its height, and they too came under Ottoman suzerainty. Saud dynasty and unification. The emergence of what was to become the Saudi royal family, known as the al-Saud, began at the town of Diriyah in Najd in Central Arabia with the accession as Emir of Muhammad bin Saud on February 22, 1727. In 1744 he joined forces with the religious leader Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, founder of the Wahhabi movement, a strict puritanical form of Sunni Islam. This alliance provided the ideological impetus to Saudi expansion and remains the basis of Saudi Arabian dynastic rule today. The Emirate of Diriyah, established in the area around Riyadh, rapidly expanded and briefly controlled most of the present-day territory of Saudi Arabia, sacking Karbala in 1802, and capturing Mecca in 1803. In 1818, it was destroyed by the Ottoman Viceroy of Egypt, Mohammed Ali Pasha. The much smaller Emirate of Najd was established in 1824. Throughout the rest of the 19th century, the al-Saud contested control of the interior of what was to become Saudi Arabia with another Arabian ruling family, the al-Rashid, who ruled the Emirate of Jabal Shamr. By 1891, the al-Rashid were victorious and the al-Saud were driven into exile in Kuwait. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire continued to control or have a suzerainty over most of the peninsula. Subject to the suzerainty, Arabia was ruled by a patchwork of tribal rulers, with the Sharif of Mecca having preeminence and ruling the Hejaz. In 1902, Abdul Rahman's son, Abdul Aziz, later known as Ibn Saud, recaptured control of Riyadh, bringing the al-Saud back to Najd, creating the Third Saudi state. Ibn Saud gained the support of the Ikhwan, a tribal army inspired by Wahhabism and led by Faisal al-Dawish, and which had grown quickly after its foundation in 1912. With the aid of the Ikhwan, Ibn Saud captured Al-Asa from the Ottomans in 1913. In 1916, with the encouragement and support of Britain, which was fighting the Ottomans in World War I, the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein bin Ali, led a pan-Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire to create a united Arab state. Although the revolt failed in its objective, the Allied victory in World War I resulted in the end of Ottoman suzerainty and control in Arabia, and Hussein bin Ali became king of Hejaz. Ibn Saud avoided involvement in the Arab revolt and instead continued his struggle with the al-Rashid. Following the latter's final defeat, he took the title Sultan of Najd in 1921. With the help of the Ikhwan, the Kingdom of Hejaz was conquered in 1924-25, and on January 10, 1926, Ibn Saud declared himself King of Hejaz. For the next 5 years, he administered the two parts of his dual kingdom as separate units. After the conquest of the Hejaz, the Ikhwan leadership's objective switched to expansion of the Wahhabist realm into the British protectorates of Transjordan, Iraq, and Kuwait, and began raiding those territories. This met with Ibn Saud's opposition, as he recognized the danger of a direct conflict with the British. At the same time, the Ikhwan became disenchanted with Ibn Saud's domestic policies, which appeared to favor modernization and the increase in the number of non-Muslim foreigners in the country. As a result, they turned against Ibn Saud and, after a 2-year struggle, were defeated in 1929 at the Battle of Sabila, where their leaders were massacred. On Ibn Saud's behalf, Prince Faisal declared the unification on September 23, 1932, and the two kingdoms of Hejaz and Najd were unified as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That date is now a national holiday called Saudi National Day. 20th century. The new kingdom was reliant on limited agriculture and pilgrimage revenues. In 1938, vast reserves of oil were discovered in the Al-Asa region along the coast of the Persian Gulf, and full-scale development of the oil fields began in 1941 under the US-controlled Aramco. Oil provided Saudi Arabia with economic prosperity and substantial political leverage internationally. Cultural life rapidly developed, primarily in the Hejaz, which was the center for newspapers and radio. However, the large influx of foreign workers in Saudi Arabia in the oil industry increased the pre-existing propensity for xenophobia. At the same time, the government became increasingly wasteful and extravagant. By the 1950s, this had led to large governmental deficits and excessive foreign borrowing. In 1953, Saud of Saudi Arabia succeeded as the King of Saudi Arabia. In 1964 he was deposed in favor of his half-brother Faisal of Saudi Arabia, after an intense rivalry, fueled by doubts in the royal family over Saud's competence. In 1972, Saudi Arabia gained a 20% control in Aramco, thereby decreasing U.S. control over Saudi oil. In 1973, Saudi Arabia led an oil boycott against the Western countries that supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War against Egypt and Syria, leading to the quadrupling of oil prices. In 1975, Faisal was assassinated by his nephew, Prince Faisal bin Musaid, and was succeeded by his half-brother King Khalid. By 1976, Saudi Arabia had become the largest oil producer in the world. Khalid's reign saw economic and social development progress at an extremely rapid rate, transforming the infrastructure and educational system of the country. In foreign policy, close ties with the U.S. were developed. In 1979, two events occurred which greatly concerned the government and had a long-term influence on Saudi foreign and domestic policy. The first was the Iranian Islamic Revolution. It was feared that the country's Shiite minority in the eastern province, which is also the location of the oil fields, might rebel under the influence of their Iranian co-religionists. There were several anti-government uprisings in the region, such as the 1979 Qatif uprising. The second event was the Grand Mosque seizure in Mecca by Islamist extremists. The militants involved were in part angered by what they considered to be the corruption and un-Islamic nature of the Saudi government. The government regained control of the mosque after 10 days, and those captured were executed. Part of the response of the royal family was to enforce the much stricter observance of traditional religious and social norms in the country and to give the ulama a greater role in government. Neither entirely succeeded, as Islamism continued to grow in strength. In 1980, Saudi Arabia bought out the American interests in Aramco. King Khalid died of a heart attack in June 1982. He was succeeded by his brother, King Fahd, who added the title custodian of the two holy mosques to his name in 1986 in response to considerable fundamentalist pressure to avoid the use of majesty in association with anything except God. Fahd continued to develop close relations with the United States and increase the purchase of American and British military equipment. The vast wealth generated by oil revenues was beginning to have an even greater impact on Saudi society. It led to rapid technological modernization, urbanization, mass public education, and the creation of new media. This and the presence of increasingly large numbers of foreign workers greatly affected traditional Saudi norms and values. Although there was a dramatic change in the social and economic life of the country, political power continued to be monopolized by the royal family, leading to discontent among many Saudis who began to look for wider participation in government. In the 1980s, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait spent $25 billion in support of Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War. However, Saudi Arabia condemned the invasion of Kuwait in 1990 and asked the United States to intervene. King Fahd allowed American and coalition troops to be stationed in Saudi Arabia. He invited the Kuwaiti government and many of its citizens to stay in Saudi Arabia, but expelled citizens of Yemen and Jordan because of their government's support of Iraq. In 1991, Saudi Arabian forces were involved both in bombing raids on Iraq and in the land invasion that helped to liberate Kuwait, which became known as the Gulf War. Saudi Arabia's relations with the West was one of the issues that led to an increase in Islamist terrorism in Saudi Arabia, as well as Islamist terrorist attacks in Western countries by Saudi nationals. Osama bin Laden was a Saudi citizen and was responsible for the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in East Africa and the 2000 USS Cole bombing near the port of Aden, Yemen. 15 of the hijackers involved in the September 11 attacks were Saudi nationals. Many Saudis who did not support the Islamist terrorists were nevertheless deeply unhappy with the government's policies. Islamism was not the only source of hostility to the government. Although extremely wealthy by the 21st century, Saudi Arabia's economy was near stagnant. High taxes and a growth in unemployment have contributed to discontent and have been reflected in a rise in civil unrest, and discontent with the royal family. In response, a number of limited reforms were initiated by King Fahd. In March 1992, he introduced the Basic Law, which emphasized the duties and responsibilities of a ruler. In December 1993, the Consultative Council was inaugurated. It is composed of a chairman and 60 members, all chosen by the king. In 1995, Fahd suffered a debilitating stroke, and the Crown Prince, Abdullah, assumed the role of de facto regent. However, his authority was hindered by conflict with Fahd's full brothers. 21st century. Signs of discontent included, in 2003 and 2004, a series of bombings and armed violence in Riyadh, Jeddah, Yanbu, and Khobar. In April 2005, the first ever nationwide municipal elections were held in Saudi Arabia. Women were not allowed to take part. In 2005, King Fahd died and was succeeded by Abdullah, who continued the policy of minimum reform and clamping down on protests. The king introduced economic reforms aimed at reducing the country's reliance on oil revenue, limited deregulation, encouragement of foreign investment, and privatization. In February 2009, Abdullah announced a series of governmental changes to the judiciary, armed forces, and various ministries to modernize these institutions, including the replacement of senior appointees in the judiciary and the mutaween with more moderate individuals, and the appointment of the country's first female deputy minister. On January 29, 2011, hundreds of protesters gathered in Jeddah in a rare display of criticism against the city's poor infrastructure after flooding killed 11 people. Police stopped the demonstration after about 15 minutes and arrested 30 to 50 people. Since 2011, Saudi Arabia has been affected by its own Arab Spring protests. In response, King Abdullah announced on February 22, 2011 a series of benefits for citizens amounting to 36 billion, of which 10.7 billion was earmarked for housing. No political reforms were included, though some prisoners indicted for financial crimes were pardoned. Abdullah also announced a package of 93 billion, which included 500,000 new homes to a cost of 67 billion, in addition to creating 60,000 new security jobs. Although male-only municipal elections were held on September 29, 2011, Abdullah allowed women to vote and be elected in the 2015 municipal elections, and also to be nominated to the Shura Council. Government and politics. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. However, according to the Basic Law of Saudi Arabia adopted by royal decree in 1992, the king must comply with Sharia and the Quran, while the Quran and the Sunnah are declared to be the country's constitution. No political parties or national elections are permitted. While some critics consider it to be a totalitarian state, others regard it as lacking aspects of totalitarianism but nevertheless classify it as an authoritarian regime. The Economist ranked the Saudi government 150th out of 167 in its 2022 Democracy Index, and Freedom House gave it its lowest not free rating, giving it a score of 8 out of 100 for 2023. According to the 2023 VDEM Democracy Indices, Saudi Arabia is the least democratic country in the Middle East. In the absence of national elections and political parties, politics in Saudi Arabia takes place in two distinct arenas, within the royal family, the Al Saud, and between the royal family and the rest of Saudi society. Outside of the Al Saud, participation in the political process is limited to a relatively small segment of the population and takes the form of the royal family consulting with the ulama, tribal sheikhs, and members of important commercial families on major decisions. This process is not reported by the Saudi media. By custom, all males of full age have a right to petition the king directly through the traditional tribal meeting known as the Majlis. In many ways the approach to government differs little from the traditional system of tribal rule. Tribal identity remains strong, and outside of the royal family, political influence is frequently determined by tribal affiliation, with tribal sheikhs maintaining a considerable degree of influence over local and national events. In recent years there have been limited steps to widen political participation, such as the establishment of the Consultative Council in the early 1990s and the National Dialogue Forum in 2003. In 2005, the first municipal elections were held. In 2007, the Allegiance Council was created to regulate the succession. In 2009, the king made significant personnel changes to the government by appointing reformers to key positions and the first woman to a ministerial post. However, these changes have been criticized as being too slow or merely cosmetic. The rule of the Al Saud faces political opposition from four sources: Sunni Islamist activism, liberal critics, the Shiite minority particularly in the eastern province, and long-standing tribal and regionalist particularistic opponents. Of these, the minority activists have been the most prominent threat to the government and have in recent years been involved in violent incidents in the country. However, open protest against the government, even if peaceful, is not tolerated. The king combines legislative, executive, and judicial functions, and royal decrees form the basis of the country's legislation. The Prime Minister presides over the Council of Ministers of Saudi Arabia and Consultative Assembly of Saudi Arabia. The king has usually been also the Prime Minister, with two exceptions: Crown Prince Faisal, who was Prime Minister during the reign of King Saud, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the current Prime Minister since 2022. The royal family dominates the political system. The family's vast numbers allows it to control most of the kingdom's important posts and to have an involvement and presence at all levels of government. The number of princes is estimated to be at least 7,000, with most power and influence being wielded by the 200 or so male descendants of Ibn Saud. The key ministries are generally reserved for the royal family, as are the 13 regional governorships. The Saudi government and the royal family have often been accused of corruption over many years, and this continues into the 21st century. In a country that is said to belong to the royal family and is named for them, the lines between state assets and the personal wealth of senior princes are blurred. The extent of corruption has been described as systemic and endemic, and its existence was acknowledged and defended by Prince Bandar bin Sultan in an interview in 2001. In its Corruption Perceptions Index for 2010, Transparency International gave Saudi Arabia a score of 5. Saudi Arabia has undergone a process of political and social reform, such as to increase public transparency and good governance, but nepotism and patronage are widespread when doing business in the country. The enforcement of the anti-corruption laws is selective and public officials engage in corruption with impunity. As many as 500 people, including prominent Saudi Arabian princes, government ministers, and business people, were arrested in an anti-corruption campaign in November 2017. Legal system. The primary source of law is the Islamic Sharia derived from the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. Saudi Arabia is unique among modern Muslim states in that Sharia is not codified and there is no system of judicial precedent, allowing judges to use independent legal reasoning to make a decision. Thus, divergent judgments arise even in apparently identical cases, making predictability of legal interpretation difficult. Saudi judges tend to follow the principles of the Hanbali school of jurisprudence found in pre-modern texts and noted for its literalist interpretation of the Quran and Hadith. However, in 2021, Saudi Arabia announced judicial reforms which will lead to an entirely codified law that eliminates discrepancies. Royal decrees are the other main source of law but are referred to as regulations rather than laws because they are subordinate to the Sharia. Royal decrees supplement Sharia in areas such as labor, commercial and corporate law. Additionally, traditional tribal law and custom remain significant. Extra-Sharia government tribunals usually handle disputes relating to specific royal decrees. Final appeal from both Sharia courts and government tribunals is to the king, and all courts and tribunals follow Sharia rules of evidence and procedure. Retaliatory punishments, or qisas, are practiced. For instance, an eye can be surgically removed at the insistence of a victim who lost his own eye. Families of someone unlawfully killed can choose between demanding the death penalty or granting clemency in return for a payment of diya by the perpetrator. Foreign relations. Saudi Arabia joined the UN in 1945 and is a founding member of the Arab League, Gulf Cooperation Council, Muslim World League, and the Organization of the Islamic Conference. It plays a prominent role in the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and in 2005 joined the World Trade Organization. Since 1960, as a founding member of OPEC, its oil pricing policy has been generally to stabilize the world oil market and try to moderate sharp price movements so as not to jeopardize the Western economies. In 1973, Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations imposed an oil embargo against the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, and other Western nations which supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War of October 1973. The embargo caused an oil crisis with many short and long-term effects on global politics and the global economy. Saudi Arabia and the United States are strategic allies, and Saudi Arabia is considered to be pro-Western. On May 20, 2017, President Donald Trump and King Salman signed a series of letters of intent for Saudi Arabia to purchase arms from the United States totaling $350 billion over 10 years. Saudi Arabia's role in the 1991 Gulf War, particularly the stationing of U.S. troops on Saudi soil from 1991, prompted the development of a hostile Islamist response internally. As a result, Saudi Arabia has, to some extent, distanced itself from the US and, for example, refused to support or to participate in the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. China and Saudi Arabia are major allies, with the relationship between the two countries growing significantly in recent decades. A significant number of Saudi Arabians have also expressed a positive view of China. In February 2019, Crown Prince Mohammed defended China's Xinjiang re-education camps for Uyghur Muslims. According to the diplomat, Saudi Arabia's human rights record has come under frequent attack abroad and so defending China becomes a roundabout way of defending themselves. The consequences of the 2003 invasion and the Arab Spring led to increasing alarm within the Saudi monarchy over the rise of Iran's influence in the region. These fears were reflected in comments of King Abdullah, who privately urged the United States to attack Iran and cut off the head of the snake. Saudi Arabia has been seen as a moderating influence in the Arab-Israeli conflict, periodically putting forward a peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians and condemning Hezbollah. Saudi Arabia halted new trade and investment dealings with Canada and suspended diplomatic ties in a dramatic escalation of a dispute over the kingdom's arrest of women's rights activist Samar Badawi on August 6, 2018. In 2017, as part of its nuclear power program, Saudi Arabia planned to extract uranium domestically, taking a step towards self-sufficiency in producing nuclear fuel. Economy. As of October 2018, Saudi Arabia is the largest economy in the Middle East and the 18th largest in the world. It has the world's second largest proven petroleum reserves and is the largest exporter of petroleum. The country has the world's second largest oil reserves and the sixth largest proven natural gas reserves. Saudi Arabia is considered an energy superpower, having the second highest total estimated value of natural resources, valued at US $34.4 trillion in 2016. The command economy is petroleum-based, roughly 63% of budget revenues and 67% of export earnings come from the oil industry. The oil industry constitutes about 45% of Saudi Arabia's nominal gross domestic product, compared with 40% from the private sector. It is strongly dependent on foreign workers, with about 80% of those employed in the private sector being non-Saudi. Challenges to the economy include halting or reversing the decline in per capita income, improving education to prepare youth for the workforce and providing them with employment, diversifying the economy, stimulating the private sector and housing construction, and diminishing corruption and inequality. OPEC limits its members' oil production based on their proven reserves. Saudi Arabia's published reserves have shown little change since 1980, with the main exception being an increase of about 100 billion barrels between 1987 and 1988. Matthew Simmons has suggested that Saudi Arabia is greatly exaggerating its reserves and may soon show production declines. From 2003 to 2013, several key services were privatized: municipal water supply, electricity, telecommunications, and parts of education and healthcare. Traffic control and car accident reporting were also privatized. According to Arab news columnist Abdel Aziz Al-Yawasheg, in almost every one of these areas, consumers have raised serious concerns about the performance of these privatized entities. In November 2005, Saudi Arabia was approved as a member of the World Trade Organization. Negotiations to join had focused on the degree to which Saudi Arabia is willing to increase market access to foreign goods, and in 2000, the government established the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority to encourage foreign direct investment in the kingdom. Saudi Arabia maintains a list of sectors in which foreign investment is prohibited, but the government plans to open some closed sectors such as telecommunications, insurance, and power transmission distribution over time. The government has also made an attempt at Saudizing the economy, replacing foreign workers with Saudi nationals, with limited success. In addition to petroleum and gas, Saudi has a significant gold mining sector in the Ma'adh region and significant other mineral industries, an agricultural sector based on vegetables, fruits, dates etc., and livestock, and large number of temporary jobs created by the roughly 2 million annual Hajj pilgrims. Saudi Arabia has had 5-year development plans since 1970. Among its plans were to launch economic cities in an effort to diversify the economy and provide jobs. The cities will be spread around Saudi Arabia to promote diversification for each region and their economy, and the cities are projected to contribute 150 billion to the GDP. Saudi Arabia is increasingly activating its ports in order to participate in trade between Europe and China in addition to oil transport. To this end, Ports such as Jeddah Islamic Port or King Abdullah Economic City are being rapidly expanded, and investments are being made in logistics. The country is historically and currently part of the Maritime Silk Road. Statistics on poverty in the kingdom are not available through the UN resources because the Saudi government does not issue any. The Saudi state discourages calling attention to or complaining about poverty. In December 2011, the Saudi Interior Ministry arrested 3 reporters and held them for almost 2 weeks for questioning after they uploaded a video on the topic to YouTube. Authors of the video claim that 22% of Saudis may be considered poor. Observers researching the issue prefer to stay anonymous because of the risk of being arrested. The unexpected impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy, along with Saudi Arabia's poor human rights records, laid unforeseen challenges before the development plans of the kingdom, where some of the programs under Vision 2030 were also expected to be affected. In May 2020, the finance minister of Saudi Arabia admitted that the country's economy was facing a severe economical crisis for the first time in decades, because of the pandemic as well as declining global oil markets. Mohammed Al-Yadin said that the country will take painful measures and keep all options open to deal with the impact. On July 2024, Saudi Arabia's Renewable Energy Localization Company has formed 3 joint ventures with Chinese companies to advance the kingdom's clean energy infrastructure. As part of Saudi Arabia's 2030 targets, the Public Investment Fund is actively promoting the localization of renewable energy components. RELC, a division of the Sovereign Fund, facilitates partnerships between global manufacturers and Saudi private sector firms to strengthen local supply chains. The joint ventures include partnerships with Envision Energy for wind turbine components, Jinko Solar for photovoltaic cells, and Lamitek for solar photovoltaic ingots and wafers. These initiatives aim to localize up to 75% of the components used in Saudi Arabia's renewable projects by 2030, positioning the country as a major global exporter of renewable technologies. Language. The official language is Arabic. There are 4 main regional dialect groups spoken by Saudis: Najdi, Hejaz, Gulf including Baharna dialects, and Southern Hejaz and Tahama dialects. Fayfi is spoken by about 50,000. The Murri language is also spoken by around 20,000 Murri citizens. Saudi Sign Language is the principal language of the deaf community, amounting to around 100,000 speakers. The large expatriate communities also speak their own languages, the most numerous of which, according to 2018 data, are Bengali, Tagalog, Punjabi, Urdu, Egyptian Arabic, Rohingya, North Levantine Arabic and Malayalam. Religion. Virtually all Saudi citizens and residents are Muslim. By law, all citizens of the country are Muslim. Estimates of the Sunni population range between 85% and 90%, with the remaining 10 to 15% being Shia Muslim, practicing either Twelver Shi'ism or Sulaimani Ismailism. The official and dominant form of Sunni Islam is Salafism, commonly known as Wahhabism, which was founded in the Arabian Peninsula by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab in the 18th century. Other denominations, such as the minority Shia Islam, are systematically suppressed. Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia are largely found in the eastern province, particularly in Qatif and al-Asa. There are an estimated 1.5 million Christians in Saudi Arabia, almost all foreign workers. Saudi Arabia allows Christians to enter the country as temporary foreign workers but does not allow them to practice their faith openly. There are officially no Saudi citizens who are Christians, as Saudi Arabia forbids religious conversion from Islam and punishes it by death. According to the Pew Research Center, there are 390,000 Hindus in Saudi Arabia, almost all foreign workers. There may be a significant fraction of atheists and agnostics, although they are officially called terrorists. In its 2017 Religious Freedom Report, the U.S. State Department named Saudi Arabia a country of particular concern, denoting systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom. Najran was home to local Christian and Jewish communities. Prior to establishment of Israel, Najran was home to 260 Jews and had friendly relations with Ibn Saud. They had a Yemenite Jewish background. After the establishment of Israel and the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, all the Jews fled for Yemen and from there headed to Israel. Religion in society. Religion is a core aspect of everyday life in Saudi Arabia. It plays a dominant role in the country's governance and legal system, and deeply influences culture and daily life, although the power of the religious establishment has been significantly eroded in the 2010s. The Hejaz region, where the Islamic holy cities of Mecca and Medina are located, is the destination of the Hajj pilgrimage, and often deemed to be the cradle of Islam. Islam is the state religion of Saudi Arabia. There is no law that requires all citizens to be Muslim, but non-Muslims and many foreign and Saudi Muslims whose beliefs are deemed not to conform with the government's interpretation of Islam must practice their religion in private and are vulnerable to discrimination, harassment, detention, and, for foreigners, deportation. Neither Saudi citizens nor guest workers have the right of freedom of religion. The dominant form of Islam in the kingdom Wahhabism arose in the central region of Najd, in the 18th century. Proponents call the movement Salafism, and believe that its teachings purify the practice of Islam of innovations or practices that deviate from the 7th century teachings of Muhammad and his companions. The Saudi government has often been viewed as an active oppressor of Shia Muslims because of the funding of the Wahhabi ideology which denounces the Shia faith. Prince Bandar bin Sultan, Saudi ambassador to the United States, stated, "The time is not far off in the Middle East when it will be literally God help the Shia. More than 1 billion Sunnis have simply had enough of them." Saudi Arabia is one of the few countries that have religious police, who patrol the streets enjoining good and forbidding wrong by enforcing dress codes, strict separation of men and women, attendance at prayer 5 times each day, the ban on alcohol, and other aspects of Sharia. However, since 2016 the power of religious police was curbed, which barred them from pursuing, questioning, requesting identification or arresting suspects. In the privacy of homes, behavior can be far looser, and reports from WikiLeaks indicate that low-ranked members of the ruling Saudi royal family indulge in parties with alcohol, drugs, and prostitutes.